"I saw the teacher kiss your daughter," the black boy whispered to her dad. And that's when everything changed. It was after 3 p.m. The hallways were quiet. The janitor's radio echoed faintly from the far end of the school. Mr. Keller, the literature teacher, had told everyone they could leave, except Emily. She sat frozen in her chair while the rest of the class gathered their bags. She didn't know why he asked her to stay. She assumed it was about her late essay, but when the last footsteps faded, Keller closed the door, locked it, smiled, and something shifted in the air. No one else saw what happened next. No one but Jordan. Jordan had forgotten his sketchbook. That's the only reason he came back. He paused in the doorway, unseen, just as Keller leaned in and kissed Emily. It wasn't fast. It wasn't an accident. And Emily, she just sat there, her hands curled into fists. She didn't move, didn't push him, didn't say anything, just stared down at the desk like her soul had slipped out of her skin. Then Keller stepped back and told her not to tell anyone. Jordan didn't breathe, didn't blink, just slipped away from the door and ran. He didn't go to the principal, didn't call his mom. He ran straight outside to where a black SUV idled behind the school gate, tinted windows, chrome rims. Emily's dad was in town that day. Everyone knew he was some kind of businessman. What no one knew, not really, was what kind of business he ran. Jordan didn't knock. He yanked the door open, climbed in, and leaned in close. "I saw the teacher kiss your daughter," he whispered, voice shaking. "She looked scared." The man didn't blink, didn't even turn, just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. And then, very quietly, he said, "Where?" And in that single word, the hallway temperature dropped 10 degrees. Jordan pointed back toward the building, his hand trembling. He hadn't meant to get involved. He didn't even know Emily that well. She sat 2 rows ahead of him, always neat, always quiet. But something about the way she looked after that kiss, it hadn't sat right. It made him sick. And something deeper told him, if he didn't say something, no one would. The man in the SUV didn't ask any more questions. He stepped out slow, like he had all the time in the world. Black shirt, heavy chain, cufflinks that glinted under the fading sun. He was the kind of man whose silence said more than shouting ever could. Jordan followed behind like a shadow, watching as Emily's dad moved down the hallway, past the lockers, past the classroom doors, straight toward room 214. Inside, Mr. Keller had gone back to grading papers like nothing had happened, but Emily, she was still sitting there. Same chair, same stunned look. Her eyes flicked up when the door creaked open. And for the first time in her life, Emily looked relieved to see her father. Keller looked up, startled. He stood, trying to regain control, that smug tone sliding back into his voice. "Sir, this is a private class." But the man didn't speak. He walked past him, straight to his daughter. He crouched, took her hand. His voice was soft. "Did he touch you?" Emily didn't answer. She just nodded once, like it was the scariest thing she'd ever had to admit. The silence afterward was thick as blood. Then, the man stood, slowly, deliberately, turned toward Keller, who had taken a step back. "You're going to walk with me," he said, his voice low and flat. "Now." And Keller, for the first time, looked genuinely afraid. There was something in the man's eyes, not rage, not panic, just pure, surgical intent, like he already knew exactly what he was going to do, and nothing Keller said would change it. He stepped aside and gestured toward the door. Keller hesitated. But something in that silence, that terrifying stillness, told him to obey. They walked out into the hallway. Keller glanced at Jordan, then Emily, then the man beside him, trying to piece it all together. But he was too late. His words didn't matter anymore. His charm, his excuses, none of it would save him now. Emily stood up slowly, and Jordan instinctively took a step closer, protective without thinking. As they made their way down the corridor, Keller began to stammer. "Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. She never said no. I didn't force her. I thought she was—" The man stopped, turned, and what he said next dropped like a lead weight. You thought wrong." They walked out the back exit, past the empty field. The SUV waited like a silent beast. The man opened the rear door and motioned Keller inside. He went, hesitantly. The door shut behind him with a dull thunk. Emily's dad turned back, looked at his daughter, and something softened. For just a second, the steel cracked, and you saw it, the pain underneath. The helplessness of a man who couldn't protect his little girl from the first real monster she ever met. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. Emily just nodded, still shaking, still pale, but she trusted him. She always had. He slid into the front seat. The engine started, and the SUV pulled away, disappearing into the shadows of the city, and with it, the man who was no longer just a father. Jordan stood next to Emily in the fading light, both of them quiet. The school bell had long stopped ringing, and yet the moment felt frozen in time, as if the world was holding its breath. Emily didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared down the road where the black car had vanished, eyes glazed with something colder than fear, numbness. Jordan wasn't sure what to do. He'd never seen anyone kiss like that. Never seen someone not fight back, but also not want it. It messed with his head, but one thing he knew for sure: it wasn't okay. What he'd seen wasn't confusion. It was violation. And now, something irreversible had been set in motion. Back in the SUV, Keller sat stiff in the back seat. His mouth moved now and then, whispering things under his breath. Legal threats, maybe, or pitiful denials, but the driver ignored him. And the man in the passenger seat? Emily's father? He was quiet, thinking. Not if, but how. They drove far, past strip malls, past the city line, into an industrial district no teacher had any business seeing. They pulled into an old warehouse lot with no signs, no lights, just concrete silence, the kind of place you don't come back from. The driver got out first, then Emily's dad. Keller hesitated, panic beginning to rise in his throat. "Listen, I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "It didn't mean anything. I didn't touch her like that. I swear I—" "Get out," the man said, calm, deadly. Keller obeyed. His knees wobbled. The warehouse door opened, groaning like an ancient secret. And as Keller disappeared inside, that's when the truth about Emily's father started to surface. The place was cold, bare floors, steel beams overhead, the kind of silence that echoes off your own breathing. Keller looked around, disoriented, like he was still hoping this was a scare tactic, some angry dad performance that would end with a threat and a warning. But then he saw the chairs. One metal, one wood, one already stained. He backed up fast, almost tripping over a chain coiled near the wall. "You can't do this," he blurted out, desperation cracking through. "I'm a teacher. You lay a hand on me and I'll ruin your life. You don't know who you're messing with." The man stepped into the light. And that's when Keller saw the ink. Not the little tattoos kids get in college. These were marks, the kind that spoke in code, that told stories in blood and fire. Symbols of rank, symbols of power. "You think I don't know who you are?" the man said, stepping closer. "You're nobody. You're a coward who preys on silence, on fear." Keller opened his mouth to protest again, but then the warehouse doors slammed shut behind them. Meanwhile, back at the house, Emily sat at the kitchen table, knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't said a word on the drive home. Jordan sat across from her, unsure why he was still there, but feeling like he needed to be. She looked up, her voice a whisper. "He's not just my dad," she said. "Not really. He does things I'm not supposed to know." Jordan leaned forward. "What kind of things?" Emily looked away. "Bad things. But only to worse people." She paused. "And no one ever finds their bodies." And Jordan suddenly felt the air thicken in the room. It wasn't said like a threat. It wasn't even meant to scare him. She said it like someone sharing a sad fact, like she was describing the way rain falls, or how the night always comes. Jordan didn't ask more. He just nodded, his throat dry. In that moment, he realized something. Emily hadn't just lost a piece of her innocence today. She'd given up the luxury of pretending her father was normal. Across the city, inside the warehouse, Keller was on his knees now, his voice hoarse from pleading. "I have a family," he gasped. "I made a mistake, that's all. I didn't hurt her, please." But the man just watched him. "You think because she didn't scream it wasn't a crime?" he asked. "You think silence is consent?" Keller looked up, confused, terrified. "You don't understand what you've taken from her," the man said. "But you're going to pay for it." And then he pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke a name. One Keller didn't recognize, but from the way the man on the other end responded, it was clear this wasn't the first time something like this had to be cleaned up. Outside the warehouse, 2 cars rolled in. No plates, no headlights. Inside were men who never asked questions, men who only moved when the boss said so. By the time the sun rose, the warehouse was empty, spotless. No Keller, no mess, just dust and silence. Back at school, the principal made a vague announcement about Mr. Keller's sudden leave of absence. No one asked too many questions. A new substitute arrived the following week, and most kids moved on. But not Emily, and not Jordan, because they knew. And carrying the truth was heavier than they expected. At school, Emily walked the halls like a ghost. Her friends noticed something was off, but no one dared ask. Rumors swirled, shallow ones, that Mr. Planketevery Keller had run off with someone's mom, that he'd finally gotten caught cheating on his wife. But no one knew the real story. Only Emily. Only Jordan. He watched her from across the lunchroom that day. She barely touched her food. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. He got up without thinking and sat across from her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, then shook her head. "No, but I'm not scared anymore." That night, her dad came home late, quiet, as always. He poured a drink but didn't touch it, just sat in the dark, staring out the window. Emily crept downstairs and stood in the doorway watching him. Her heart thudded in her chest. "Did you kill him?" she asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, he just said, "He won't hurt anyone again." And that was the closest thing to an answer she'd ever get. Emily stepped into the room and sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think I'm still good?" she asked, her voice small. He closed his eyes. "You were always good. What happened doesn't change that." She didn't believe it yet, but she wanted to. And maybe that was enough, for now. It haunted her, not the kiss, not even the warehouse. What clung to her like a shadow was that she hadn't said no. She hadn't screamed. She'd frozen. And now that Keller was gone, really gone, there was no one to ask why, no one to undo it, only the quiet weight of memory. Jordan noticed the change in her, how she started walking taller, how she stared people down instead of avoiding their eyes. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was sharper. And every day, a little more of the fear faded into something else. Resolve, maybe. She found him after school one day, sketching behind the gym. She sat beside him without asking. "You told him," she said. "You didn't even know me, and you told him." Jordan shrugged. "Didn't seem right, the way he looked at you, the way you looked after." Emily nodded slowly. "You're the only one who saw." Jordan looked down at his drawing, a quiet forest scene, something peaceful. "Yeah, I did." They sat in silence. Then she said something he'd never forget. "My dad once told me, there's a kind of justice the world doesn't allow, but he doesn't live in the world." Jordan didn't fully get it, but he understood the weight behind it. He understood that she didn't need him to fix anything, just to stay. That night, her father stood at the back of her room, watching her sleep like he used to when she was small. For a moment, he looked like any dad. But inside, he knew. There was no undoing what she'd endured. All he could do now was make sure no one else ever got close enough to try again. The next few weeks passed like a dream, or maybe a fog. Mr. Keller's name was erased from everything. His desk, emptied. His email auto-responded with, "On leave indefinitely." The other teachers tiptoed around it, too careful. too polite, but beneath their silence, there was something else: fear. Somehow, they knew not to ask. Emily's father had made a few calls. Quiet ones. He didn't leave fingerprints. Just pressure, influence, a favor for a favor. One school board member was replaced. One officer suddenly transferred. One reporter who'd been sniffing too close got a promotion out of state. The world adjusted. But Jordan hadn't. One afternoon, he asked Emily, "Are you really okay with what happened to him?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "I'm not okay with any of it, but I sleep at night now." Jordan nodded, but he couldn't let go of it. Not fully. The violence, the warehouse, the vanishing act, it stayed with him. Not because he disagreed, but because it showed him how fast justice could become vengeance. He'd grown up believing in right and wrong, but now he wasn't so sure where the line really was. And yet, he didn't regret telling her dad. Not for a second. That night, he sketched her, from memory. A girl sitting at her desk, sunlight on her face, head turned toward the window. But this time, he drew her eyes full of fire. Not broken, alive. Because somehow, despite the fear, the silence, and the shadows her father lived in, she had survived. And maybe that meant they both could. Months passed. The leaves changed. Winter pressed against the school windows like a silent witness. Emily never spoke of Keller again, and no one dared ask. But something had shifted in her. Not hard, not cold, just clear. She knew who she was now, what she'd come through. One afternoon, as the snow started to fall, she walked home alone and found her father in the garage, fixing something that didn't need fixing. His sleeves were rolled up, arms scarred with old stories no one talked about. She stood in the doorway. "I need to ask you something," she said. He didn't look up. "Okay. If it ever happens to someone else, someone like me, will you help them too?" He paused, turned, met her eyes. "If they ask," he said. "Yes." She nodded. That was enough. That night, Emily lit a candle in her room. Not for him, not for the man who hurt her, but for herself. For the girl who didn't scream and still made it out. For the voice that came back, little by little. And for the boy who saw what others didn't and did something. Jordan, across town, watched the snow fall through his window. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew he'd done the right thing. Even if it scared him. Even if the world stayed gray. Because sometimes, justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes, it wears a father's silence and a daughter's unbroken heart. And sometimes, the monsters disappear. Because someone made sure they would.